started here. Okay. So today I am very excited to welcome our two guests from the Yale Film Archive, Brian Meacham and Archer Neilson. Brian is the managing archivist of the Yale Film Archive, where he has worked since 2013. He oversees acquisition, inspection, cataloging, and preservation of the film collection, which includes more than 8,000 print and preprint elements acquired by the university over the last 55 years. He teaches the theory and practice of the film archive as a lecturer in the Yale Film and Media Studies program and oversees the Cinema Veritas program to strike new 35 millimeter and 16 millimeter prints from the Film Archives collection. A graduate of the Selznick School of Film Preservation at George Eastman Museum, he worked as a film preservationist at the Academy Film Archive in Los Angeles before coming to Yale. He has represented Associate Archives on the International Federation of Film Archives Executive Committee and has been a member of the board of the Association of Moving Image Archivists. Archer is the film programmer and selector of circulating media at the Yale Film Archive, where she has worked since 2012. In 2014, along with colleagues Brian Meacham and Michael Kerbel, she launched the archive's public film screening program, which has since screened more than 300 films. She's also served as an associate programmer for the South by Southwest Film and TV Festival with a focus on documentary, building on her previous work with the Independent Television Service and UC Berkeley's Pacific Film Archive. Her programming emphasis is collaborative projects with archives, museums, and other cultural institutions, and her work has been seen throughout the United States and in the UK, Mexico, India, and the Netherlands. She holds a BA in Film Studies from Yale and an MA in Media Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. So Archer, I will now hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for having us. We're really happy to be here today. Let's just get right into the slideshow and we can tell you a little bit more about who we are, what we do. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. Let's get going. So we are located right here in this building. Anybody who's been to Yale might recognize this as Sterling Memorial Library. It's right at the center of campus, and we are on the very top floor. That's it. That's our little box. Brian's office is over to the left. I'm over on the right-hand side. We've been here since about 2021. So what we do in this space is, if we go one more ahead, there we go. We have a large print collection, as you heard about in Brian's intro. That's a growing print collection. We have a strong and hopefully growing public screening series. All of our screenings are completely free and open to the public. And we also have a large circulating video library that consists of close to 60,000 items now on all sorts of different formats. We've focused on moving image media throughout our history, but in the near future, I think we're going to be starting to do more collaborations with Beinecke and other groups at Yale to bring in paper records around filmmakers, so we can really become more of a research hub, not just a place for holding the media. So I'm very excited about that. I'd like to tell you just a tiny bit about the history of our organization. The collection started in the late 60s, and our work started with that collection. For a long time, those films that Yale brought in were used very, very frequently by faculty and by students for, film society screenings and whatnot. They weren't necessarily that well taken care of. And so our department was founded in 1982 to really take care of that print collection. Shortly thereafter, home video became a major part of how media was accessed. And so, while some universities decided to put the video library into the main library and have the film archive as a separate thing, here at Yale, they were put together. And one of the things that happened is that because the video library became so important to so many people and it had to grow so rapidly in supporting teaching and research, that the film print collection was a little bit left behind for a while. That changed in 2012 when our former director, Michael Kerbel, decided he was going to sort of reshape the organization, have us join FIAF, the International Federation of Film Archives, bring me in with my programming emphasis and Brian in with his collection emphasis, and we were going to do sort of a 1-2 punch to really kind of shake it up. So since 2012, Brian and I have been working with our former boss, Michael Corbell, our new boss, Tom Day, in a lot of kind of behind the scenes heavy lifting to get the place up and stronger. There was a lot of work on improving our spaces, like the image you just saw of our new location. We've been in since 2021. It was fully renovated for us. But there was also the creation of two additional screening rooms on campus. There was one before, now we're up to three where you can show 35 millimeter, which is a really special treat. We joined the library along the way, which has definitely helped in terms of the circulation and just discoverability of the items in our collection. We worked on getting some endowments to pay for all this stuff. So that was key. We had a name change. We were originally founded as the Yale Film Study Center, which means something a little different in the archive world. So once we became Yale Film Archive, that kind of elevated our standing a little bit. And then we also did a lot of background work, just convincing people of the need for an organization like this and the importance of it, because film is one of those funny things where, if you do believe it's an aesthetically important and a good subject for academic study, then you're on board. If you think it's entertainment, you know, maybe you're not going to be too enthusiastic about devoting resources to it. So a lot of our work has really been about convincing people how film can be important in a university setting. In terms of the print collection, I'm going to turn it over to Brian and let him tell you what we're doing over there.
Okay, thank you, Archer, and thanks everyone for being here today. This is a shot of our film conservation area. It's just on the other side of that door. And it is where I and my colleagues who are student interns end up doing our film inspection work. So we have a couple of Steenbeck flatbed viewing machines, which can gently show film. We have a couple of inspection benches in the back of the room there, right underneath that collection of film reels. And then to the right-hand side, we have a small gauge transfer unit where we can transfer regular 8, Super 8, 16 millimeter film, as well as sound film to digital files. So that's kind of the space where we do the work. I want to talk about three kind of prongs of the collection building here that I've been doing over the last 10 or 12 years. And those are in terms of archiving sort of Yale history, preserving the unique materials in our collection, and then creating new prints for our collection going forward, which is kind of the newest of those prongs. First, I'll just show a quick shot of the library shelving facility, which is the university-wide library storage building in Hamden, Connecticut, which is a 10 or 15-minute drive from Yale campus, where all of the Yale library systems offsite storage is. And so this is one row of one shelving unit that happens to hold our film prints. So they're stored in climate-controlled conditions, and they can be retrieved here to the library where our office is on a 24-hour notice basis. So I'm going to start with archiving Yale history. About 10 years ago, I got a tip that there was a filmmaker had been at Yale 100 years ago in the 1920s and had made some films and I was asked if I knew anything about that person. I didn't know anything about him, so I looked up his relatives, his family, his remaining family, and found in Northwest Connecticut a cache of about 450 reels of 16 millimeter film. This guy was an experimenter, a tinkerer, and a film obsessive, and he shot film his entire life. So I went up to that house, I took all that film, brought it all back, and ended up finding what we believe is the first ever student feature film made in the United States. It's a 2.5 hour adaptation of Tom Jones, the novel by Henry Fielding, made 99 years ago, debuted in the spring of 1927. And it's an ambitious and really quite incredible effort. It was written up there, you see, in the New York Times. And we have the original negative of that film. So I'm working on a preservation project and a rescoring project so we can have or a live musical accompaniment for this silent film. Um, so talking about a different mode of preservation for films where we have the original negatives, these are films that are maybe documentary shorts, animated films, feature films that are maybe a little bit better known, that might not have anything to do with Yale, but have ended up in our collection. As you may know, film preservation is a pretty expensive undertaking. We still do all of our film preservation in an analog fashion, so we're always creating new film elements from film elements. And for that work, we rely on the largesse of grant funding organizations, especially the National Film Preservation Foundation. The NFPF has provided, I think, now 14 grants to us over the last 2 decades. And we were also lucky enough to receive a grant from the Film Foundation. That's the foundation led by Martin Scorsese that funds film preservation efforts all over the world. And so, with grants from those two organizations, we have been able to preserve 22 short and feature films, totaling over $330,000 worth of support. So, without that money, we would never have been able to do any of that work. We have a small budget of our own, so those combined with these grant-funded projects, we usually do about 2 or 3 short films a year. And those are all from original negatives or whatever the best surviving elements are that we hold here in our collection. And Archer will talk about this a little bit later, but we always sort of fold those preserved films into our public programming so we can really bring them back to audiences, which is, of course, the end goal of all that preservation. I'm going to talk really briefly about one particular film, which actually has one of our best seen films. I think it's on the Criterion Channel. It's screened in theaters and it has distribution. It's called James Baldwin from Another Place, made in 1973, taking a look at James Baldwin's life in exile in Turkey. We had the original negative for that film. And so I want to just walk you through what it means to preserve a film in an analog fashion in 2025. So first we take the sound, we capture the sound sources digitally, and we had, luckily here, a variety of sound sources. The original track negative used to make prints back in the 1970s, the original magnetic soundtrack used to make that track negative, and then, of course, the quarter-inch magnetic audio that was actually in the recorder in the room with Baldwin when Sadat Pakai, the filmmaker, was making his film. So all of those get captured into a digital audio restoration suite by our friends over at Audio Mechanics in Burbank, California. And they just bring the audio back to where it was in the beginning. No sweetening, no 5.1, no Dolby Atmos, just removing all the pops and clicks and hisses. And then they create a broadcast wave file. And from that, we make a new optical track negative because, of course, one of the end goals for us is to make new 35 millimeter show prints that can travel around the world. So for that, you need an optical track negative. Then we move on to the picture side of things. And for this project, we were lucky enough to have the original negative in our vaults. And so we use the original negative, which is, again, the film that was in the camera there in Baldwin's apartment. And so we take that, and instead of printing from that and maybe running that very valuable and important piece of film to death, we make a copy of it so we can have a preservation master that we can then print from. But if you know anything about the photochemical process, you can't make a negative from a negative. You have to make a negative from a positive. So we make what's known as a fine grain master, which is a positive black and white element, very high detail, very low contrast. And from that very low contrast element, we can make a new preservation negative that has the correct amount of contrast. And then, of course, we bring in that optical track that we made in the previous slide, and we marry the two together, and we make what's called an answer print. Now, when I say we, all of this work is taking place at Photochem, which is a laboratory in Burbank, California, one of 2 active film labs left in the United States. So if you're wondering why we're doing this or why we're so intent on this now, it's because it's getting harder and harder, and we want to do as much of this work as we can while Kodak is still making film and while there are still 2 labs in the US and a handful of other international labs that we can work with. So we've made that answer print. We've checked that the contrast is right. No shot is too dark or too light. Everything sounds good. And then we can scan that fine grain master we made to create DPX files, very high resolution digital video files that we can use to make a DCP, maybe some streaming elements, anything to sort of help broaden the various ways in which we can provide access to this film. And in the end, you have James Baldwin eating an egg. You have an amazing film that has circulated around the world. And here you can see it played at the Film Society of Lincoln Center and Film Forum. It was the first Yale Film Archive restoration to be selected for the New York Film Festival. And so it's now sort of available and has made its way around the world, all sort of beginning with that 35 millimeter original negative, which we had in our vaults. One other project I wanted to mention, which was alluded to in the introduction, is the Cinema Veritas program, which is in year 3 right now of a collaborative effort between the Yale University Library and the Yale Faculty of Arts and Sciences to kind of kickstart the funding of a large number of 35 millimeter and 16 millimeter prints, as I talked about, for that exact reason that there aren't that many labs left in the US. And so we've made more than 50 prints over the last 3 years of some of the greatest films of all time, many of which you see here on this screen, most of which are sort of what you'd think of as classic independent international films, but some of which are new films by current filmmakers, including experimental filmmakers like Jody Mack, who works exclusively in the 16 millimeter realm, and we want to make prints of her films too while we still can. One sort of subset of that printmaking effort is an interesting little project that we've worked on. We were now in film number 3 or 4, actually, of this project to make new 35 millimeter prints of digitally originated films. So these are films by contemporary filmmakers. So you see Palm Springs by Max Barbacoa, Minari by Isaac Chung, and She Came to Me by Rebecca Miller. These all happen to be Yale filmmakers, Yale alumni, whom I know through other sort of channels. And I reached out to them and said, how would you feel about us making a new 35 millimeter print of your digital film? And they were all incredibly excited about it because, what filmmaker doesn't love a tangible item on a shelf somewhere to know that their work is going to sort of carry forward and they don't have to worry about whether a file might go corrupt or some company might take over the streaming service that owns their film and not want to circulate it anymore. So for those and other reasons, we've been making a small set of one-off unique prints of some contemporary films. These are all films made in the last 6 years. So that's been a very exciting way to create sort of something interesting for our audiences and also make great relationships with our filmmakers. And so I want to end with a way that sort of connects with the students here at Yale, with our collection in a small way, and also creating unique kind of public screening experiences. I teach a class, as was mentioned, every other year in the Film and Media Studies program, in which students get to archive their own film. They are given a budget. They go out on eBay and they find a print that sort of meets with their research interests. And they bring that print into the collection. It gets added to the Yale Film Archive collection, and they get to inspect it, repair it, scan it, do frame grabs, research it, write about it, and then they introduce it at a public screening. So this is a little local news article about last time in 2024, and some of the students from this year and previous years holding their prints with pride as they arrive from eBay. So this is a way to kind of connect building a film collection with undergraduates, many of whom were born too late to have ever seen a film on film in a theater. And it also means that we're able to add a half dozen really interesting films selected by student curators to our collection every 2 years. And so we have a collection now of more than 40 prints that students have selected and added to our collection, which really adds an interesting flavor. So with that note about the public screening experience, I'm going to hand it back over to Archer.
That class picture screening Brian is talking about is one of my absolute favorite events. It's so much fun, and it's great to hear the students talking about their experiences with the films, what drew them to the different films. And so anytime you can get students or young people involved in your collection like that, it's just fantastic. So in terms of our public screening series, the Film Archive would occasionally program films over the year, but we really got going in earnest in about 2014. That was a year when we established Treasures from the Yale Film Archive, which is sort of our flagship film screening series. This series just shows standalone screenings of films from our collection. Each season, we try to make a collection that's as broad and diverse as we possibly can with the 35 millimeter prints that are in good shape in our collection. And when we started in 2014, we were really only doing about one screening a month, just because at that point, there was so much demand on the one screening room on campus. Some of the things we really kept in mind with that screening was emphasizing the educational mission of the whole thing. So if we could go forward one slide, these are some of the film notes that were created. For the first 10 years of the Treasures from the Yale Film Archive series, every film had its own 600 to 700 word essay that one of us would write. It always had to be spoiler free because we would hand these out in person to everybody attending the screening. And now those are all stored online. People can search for them, and we get contacted from people all the time who find out about us through these film notes. Anytime we're doing any kind of screening, especially when it might not have an obvious academic side to it. We just have to hit that educational mission hard. So we, for instance, recently did a screening of Die Hard. That's a great film and it should be studied, but we also had Chris Hawthorne, who is a former LA Times architecture critic, come and talk about the building in Die Hard, right? So we're not just showing them for fun, we're showing them to sort of give a more scholarly side to as well. In the first few years, we were also working really hard to build up our audience, and we did that in so many ways. We did it to outreach to a lot of organizations. We did it by invitations for people to speak who were members or representatives of those organizations. If we wanted to bring their audience in, we gave away door prizes. I mean, we really had to hustle. We would go on local public radio shows, and slowly that audience really did build up. And now we have a pretty strong, pretty devoted fan base, and most of our films are, if not full or nearly full. So that's really exciting. Another thing we really worked on was tone in terms of our film notes, in terms of our social media and our website, trying to find a good balance that seemed to work well for Yale audiences, New Haven audiences, young audiences, old audiences. And I think it worked out well, but that's one of those things that you don't hear about too much, but is really key in making people feel like they're in a conversation with you. Since 2022, because we now have those 3 spaces where we can show film on campus, we've been able to show a lot more screenings. We now we're having 40 films this semester. And it's also this a bit of, elbow room to do more, have more places for screenings means that we can show more diverse series. And that's what's really exciting to me, because we get to really show these films as connected for a reason. We're moving away from the one-off series model to more coherent series. So if you want to take a look on the next slide at some of our calendars, this gives you a little bit of a sense of the kind of things we're showing. Most of our screening series are based on things in our collection, but not entirely. We have some films that we bring in every semester from other archives or distributors around the world. We do retrospectives. Right now, we're doing a full retrospective of Stanley Kubrick, all on film, which is something we're very excited about. In the past, we've done looks at Sam Ben, Ingmar Bergman. We have an ongoing Frederick Wiseman series based on the acquisition of his personal print collection. We did something similar with James Ivory a few years ago. Every now and then we'll have an actor-focused screening. So we recently did a series on Geraldine Page for her centenary. She is someone whose papers are in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library here at Yale, and so it was a good opportunity to sort of bring those 2 collections together. We had one recently on Henry Fonda. That was based on collaboration with the Film and Media Studies program. We're dipping our toe into national cinemas. Those are very exciting, but they really require more screening slots to do it right, because you don't want to leave anybody out, and you don't want to misrepresent a national cinema. So we recently had a series called Oh Canada, looking at films from the North. These were some 35 millimeter prints from our collection, but each screening was paired with a short from the National Film Board of Canada. A little while ago, we had a series called French 75 for Francophone films from 1975 for their 50th anniversary. The thing I really like doing the most, though, is thematic series. Vertigoals would be an example, where we took the film Vertigo and looked at a whole bunch of other films that were in some way inspired by or shaped by Vertigo, whether they be, mainstream Hollywood movies, experimental movies, you name it. The Nixon years was one we did, also timed to the 50th anniversary of Nixon's resignation, when we looked at a lot of films from sort of the mid-70s in American cinema. Partnerships are also really key to us in doing everything we do. We work quite a bit with the Yale Center for British Art, and I want to highlight a screening that you are seeing images from now that we did with the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. In the past, we've done an art and protest series with them. We're about to do a series for America 250 called American Tunes. But this is a really interesting event that we did back in April of 2024. The Beinecke has some film in their collection, and they are very happy to hold the films of Solomon Sir Jones. You see him up on the upper left. He was an African-American minister slash amateur filmmaker who went around the world making absolutely brilliant home movies. But his most interesting films, I think, are the ones that are showing African-American life in Oklahoma City at that time, around Oklahoma. And so they have these prints, but they're not really a film exhibiting organization. We saw that we were coming up on 2024 as the 100-year anniversary of when he began to make film. So we approached them with the idea of showing some of Solomon Jones's home movies, along with the film Within Our Gates by Oscar Micheaux, which you see here on the right. This is a landmark African-American fiction film. So we thought it would be really interesting to have these two things come together, a 35 millimeter fiction film from our collection with some home movies from their collection, and have those two things talk to each other and get these two different perspectives on African-American life in the 20s. And the whole thing was done with the live musical accompaniment. And so that was, whenever we're working with partners who have collections, we love ways to get those elements from those two collections to talk to each other and have them in conversation. I wanted in the last little couple minutes to just talk quickly about how we put a series together. And so I'm going to use an example that people interested in performing arts might be interested in. It's a series that we have going on now called Meredith Monk at the Movies. This series started with the documentary Monk in Pieces, which I highly recommend. I think it's a fantastic look at Meredith Monk. It's such a fun and exciting and well put together film, and it talks about Monk as a composer, as a choreographer, as a performer, as a vocalist, but it also really touches on something that's not discussed that much, which is Monk in relation to film. The film is a very kaleidoscopic film, and so we decided to take that sort of kaleidoscopic collage approach to how we put a series about Meredith Monk and film together. So we wanted to have films by Monk, films about Monk, films that used Monk's music that you maybe have seen the film, but maybe you didn't know that was Meredith Monk's music. And so the series started with the documentary Monk in Pieces. I worked with Billy Shebar very early after I saw the film about a year and a half ago to let him know we were interested and get on his radar. We screened this last week, and we had Billy, along with Yale's Mark Robinson, have a post-screening discussion that was fantastic. Mark is a great historian of performance in theater and writes quite a bit about it here at Yale. He recently had a publication where there's a chapter about Meredith Monk. So the screening gave him an opportunity to use his writing in a way that was a little bit out of the ordinary for some of the academics at Yale to do. So that was our first event. The next one will be a screening of a film by Meredith Monk called Book of Days, and that'll be paired with 16 millimeter earrings. These are the two images on the left. After that will be on February 19th, if anybody's around New Haven and wants to come. On February 21st, we will start looking at films that use Meredith Monk's music. And so we chose three of the most completely dissimilar films we could. True Stories by David Byrne will screen on February 21st. Notre Musique by Jean-Luc Godard, which will screen on March 5th. And then The Big Lebowski by the Coen brothers on April 4th. So with these films, it's, you can think that these are completely different audiences for these movies. And so we wanted to get them all together, get them learning about Meredith Monk with that documentary, and then seeing how her work sort of filtered out into all of these other films. Now, from our side, we weren't just doing this because we're interested in Meredith Monk and wanted to see movies about her. We're doing it in a way to activate items from our own collection. So the film you see on the bottom left is 16 millimeter earrings. It's a film that was preserved by Yale a few years ago. It's a film that was directed by Robert Withers, and he made it in collaboration with Meredith Monk. So we've had this film preserved for a while, but we didn't really have the right opportunity to show it. We could just do a one-off screening, but it didn't quite feel right. And so I'm really glad we held on to it until what's really the right moment, so we can really give a lot of context for this film. True Stories is not a film from our collection, but Notre Musique and The Big Lebowski both are. Anytime, you don't have a lot of Coen brothers and Godard pairings, right? And so when we can put these two together, have people respond to them, see how Monk is used through different filmmakers along the way, it sort of just becomes a lot richer than if you were just showing one of these films independently. Also, if you show Big Lebowski and you have it paired with Meredith Monk and Jean-Luc Godard, then nobody asks any questions about whether it matches Yale's educational mission. It's clearly part of a bigger picture. So these films, when it comes to these films, what really matters to us is ultimately getting them to the audience, as Brian mentioned. And so I think the audience is really where all the films come to life. And that's really, in terms of the public screening program, a big part of why we're doing it. We think a lot about, if you would mind going to the next slide, Brian, we think a lot about why we're programming. And if you're programming, let's say for a Cinematheque, you might only really be programming for that audience. That might be your most important stakeholder. But with us, we're doing it to as part of a university. So there's the academic side of it. We're doing it as part of the library. So there's an access side. We're doing it as part of an organization that thinks a lot about its relationship to the people in the New Haven community. So there's that. Because we're doing our programming based on a collection, we want to make sure we're doing right by the people who let us have their films. And so all of these things are things that we're thinking about when we're deciding to put programming together. I think it comes with challenges, but it certainly makes for some really, to me, interesting and exciting work that seems to really connect well with our audiences. So I think that just about wraps it up. I would love to hear any questions you might have, and I'm sure Brian would as well. But thank you for letting us talk.
Thank you both so much. I'll give people some time if you want to put things in the chat. I think there's a manageable number of us. If people want to unmute and ask questions, please feel free to do that as well. Archer and Brian, I'll ask a question just to get us started while some people are thinking. You had mentioned at the beginning and a little bit in the middle about having some connections with the manuscript collections. Is there kind of a conscious effort in terms of if you're getting new acquisitions in terms of trying to find some connections with things that are in manuscripts, or is that something that's just kind of been happening accidentally?
Well, no, I'll say that a lot of that is very, very conscious. Like, for example, the Beinecke holds the papers of the filmmaker Barbara Hammer, and in conjunction, knowing that those papers are there, I met with Barbara near the end of her life, and once she had passed away, we made a real effort to join to sort of complement those papers by acquiring as large a collection of her film prints as possible. So we didn't have the money at the time when her papers came here to do that. But once we did, I made sure to work with the Academy Film Archive, who are preserving her entire body of work, to add those prints to the collection. So someone who comes here and researches her papers, in the morning could watch her films in the afternoon. And for some other prospective acquisitions that we haven't quite made yet, but are hoping to, that involve both film and paper, we have, sort of naturally found a curator over at the Beinecke whose expertise aligns with the subject matter of the filmmaker whose work we hope to acquire, in order to sort of get buy-in and also a kind of sense of how important these papers are. And so the films and the papers can come together and not be separated, as has happened in the past.
And on the programming side, when we work with them, pretty much everything to do with one of the museums or Beinecke or whichever group on campus is tied to something that they're already doing. It's not just that we're showing it for the heck of it. It's because they have an exhibition going up about a certain thing. And so we approach them and say, how about we do this film component? And so then you get the two different audiences coming together and being able to experience sort of the same ideas from a different angle, from looking at the material objects and looking at films on a similar topic.
Great. Thank you, guys. We do have a question in the chat. It says, I was just wondering what licensing/permissions look like for you for the screenings. Has there ever been something you really wanted to show that you couldn't get permissions for?
There have been a few.
Yeah, great
We have a
question.
huge collection of films from South Asia, and we have a hard time getting rights on those. And every year I feel like we say, this is the year we're going to show this, and it's just very, very difficult to track those down. I think Brian could probably speak to some of the rarer things that he has uncovered over the years, but in general, yes, we have to pay public performance rights for every single film we show. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's It can
They
sometimes take a good bit of time just tracking down who that rights holder is. And then of course that adds greatly to our budget.
Yeah, it's never as easy as you'd like. There's no sort of union catalog of who holds the rights to what. And so you have sort of a first line that you go to, and then after that you start looking around. There are a lot of great collaborative resources put together by film programmers who are all in the same boat. So we're all so who has the rights to say The Big Lebowski now? Maybe it's switched because of some corporate merger or takeover or the end of a certain legal agreement. And so, I've had to go as far as, tracking someone down who runs a winery somewhere in Southern California who happens to own the rights to one title and they aren't even in the movie business, just the weirdest things like that. But you do have to do it because, the last thing you want is for someone to accuse you of having screened one of their films without paying those rights fees because they are important. So we do it, but it feels like it gets more and more challenging each year as these sort of corporate takeovers keep making a confusing mess out of the histories of some of these films.
Mhm. Great, thank you. If there's other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or you can unmute. Won't talk for a moment in case anybody has a question. Well, I have another question that I will ask. In terms of access to the films or anything else that you have in the archive, what type of requests are typical for you that's beyond the programming that you guys put together for the screenings? Like, do you usually have people act accessing the films, or is it more actually just preservation, conservation work?
We have a pretty active print loan system, a print loan kind of project where a lot of different organizations around the world know what we have because it has screened at Yale or it has screened somewhere else. And so right now, I think we have 5 35 millimeter prints that are out on loan at various venues around the country. We just got two back that went to Australia. We have two that are in California for James Ivory. He actually donated all his film prints here, but then USC, which was his alma mater, wanted to celebrate him, which they just did this past weekend. So they borrowed some of his prints that he had given to us. And then we have a very strong relationship. I think we've lent to 12 different venues in New York City, which is, of course, a big cinephile hub. And they're always interested in finding new sources for prints that might not have been tapped yet. So we've lent to every one of those dozen venues in New York, and we do it pretty frequently. The other thing that we get is we have a few unique collections where I'll have a researcher who will know that, for example, the collection of the pioneer animator Mary Ellen Butte lives at the Yale Film Archive. And so I've had, researchers come from around the world to come look at film that only exists in those film forms. Like there are no digital transfers of these experimental oscilloscope films, so they'll have to come here and look at them. So we have a few small collections that do attract individual researchers who are kind of in the know. But I'd say our strongest aspect of that, besides our own programming, is our print loan system.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
We do have a couple other questions in the chat. So the first one is, what are your hopes for the future of the archives? Any pie in the sky projects you'd like to see happen?
Mm.
Well, I would like to see Brian continue to be able to make some of these new prints. I think that that's been fantastic and it's certainly improved our programming opportunities in the last few years. I think we'd like to do more screenings compared to the other FIAF university affiliated film archives in the United States. Our screening program is relatively small only because we don't have a dedicated space. We have 3 spaces, which is terrific, but we're sharing those spaces with people doing lectures and poetry readings and a cappella singing groups and whatnot. And so I think down the road, it would be wonderful to have a dedicated space just for public screenings at Yale. And I'm also very excited about the moves recently to sort of expand what we do into paper records, into the papers of certain filmmakers. And I think that's going to be very exciting. Also just trying to bring the collections that exist to Yale sort of more in conversation with the holdings we have so that we are seen more as a research hub for film over time.
I'll answer this question and the next one, which is about the digital transfer equipment, kind of in one fell swoop. One of my hopes is to provide more digital access to our unique collections, which we have scanned. So we have a piece of equipment called an HDS Plus, which is made by Film Fabriek. It's a Dutch company, and it is a sprocketless scanner, very, very gentle, so it can pull the film along with just a little wheel of kind of sticky rubber. And so you can have a very shrunken film on there, and it can be captured at up to 2K with the camera we have, but we could easily swap it out for an improved camera and get even higher resolution. But we have some amazing, amazing home movie collections that can't be seen any other way. They're too fragile to be projected. A lot of South Asian home movies from India and the Indian diaspora around the world. The home movies of lots of Yale alumni from as far back as the mid 1920s. And so we're in the middle right now of a process of building out an online access system to be able to share those films as well as other films for which we have filmmaker approval and permission from our collection with audiences who can't come and see them on film in New Haven. So that's kind of a big dream of mine to make that more something that I can be proud of rather than that I have to always make an excuse for, well, yeah, we really don't have that, which is what I've been doing for the last 10 years. So, and the le next question about fear of losses of the specialized businesses. Yes. So I just actually, you mentioned the UCLA archive. I just wrote them an email saying, essentially, can we give you some money? Like, what films of yours can you make us new prints of? Because they have a photochemical lab and we want to do what we can to keep it going. We want to do what we can to keep Photochem in Burbank and Color Lab in Maryland going. And all of that also is deeply tied up with how Kodak is doing because Kodak is the only manufacturer of film stock. So I feel like sometimes I'm trying to keep these businesses afloat or do what small part I can to do that. And so whatever money I can funnel in their direction, which then returns to us these amazing, canonical or all these, interesting, fascinating films that we'll have for the next 150 or 200 or 300 years. I think it's a very good investment, and it keeps those businesses alive for other companies and other organizations and other archives to take advantage of their skills and services before all of that is lost.
Yeah. And all of this is a lot more challenging than it was 20 years ago because in addition to what Brian's talked about, you have all of these mergers or takeovers with studios. So certain collections might not be available for licensing anymore. You have changes in availability of equipment. You know, the Steenbecks Brian was talking about, there's sort of one guy on the East Coast who can service those, right? So this used to be a more common skill and now it's rare. It's a lot more difficult to find good, well-trained projectionists anymore because, you know, you don't have one in every town like you had back in the day. And yeah, so all of this is making it definitely more of a niche service these days, which is why I think a lot of this has sort of drifted more to universities over the years, especially on the programming side, you know, as the art house cinemas in some towns have disappeared. Some towns are coming back, which is great, but in a lot of towns they've just become harder for individuals to run. And so the institutions have needed to step in and, you know, make these decisions like Brian's talking about. Well, how can we allocate our resources to keep these behind the scenes things alive so that we can continue to have this art form in the future?
Great. Thank you. And yeah, that's definitely something that I think is a concern for most people who work in with those mediums. Are there any other questions from anybody? Okay. Okay. Well, Brian and Archer, thank you both so much. This was wonderful and very informative, and very excited to see all the programming that you are getting out to, especially to students in a college environment. So thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for having us.
This was great.
Thank you. Thank you,
Have a good
everyone.
afternoon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much.